Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode number 25 of the Lebanese Biodiversity podcast. My name is Mira, and I am an entomologist, and I study wild bees. Today, I will be speaking to you about them. So, what is a wild bee? What do they look like? Where can you find them? And joining me on this episode is Mohammad Abdallah, a researcher on invasive plant species. So, I thought of recording this because I interviewed colleagues on their work on wild bees, and I will be publishing these episodes later this month. But before, and considering that wild bees is a very little known topic, I thought of preparing this introduction. Don't hesitate to ask any questions that come on your mind on this topic. I am more than happy to talk about wild bees forever. Enjoy the episode and see you on the next one.
Good evening. First, thank you for doing this again with me. I'm really excited to do this session with you. I am really interested to discover the scientists behind this podcast. And as a scientist who work as an entomologist, I would really want to know what is an entomologist and what made you become an entomologist.
Okay. Well, first, thank you for coming on the podcast for the fourth time and for your patience. And I really enjoy recording those. And so, I am an entomologist. I say this in every introduction without any further detail. So, an entomologist is a person who specializes in insects, studying them, their classification, their ecology, their interactions with the environment, their biology, etc. So, I specialize in wild bees. And because I started working on wild bees for most of my time a few years ago, I now call myself an entomologist because of that.
There's a big question: why specializing in insects and bees is important?
I think that specializing in any discipline in natural sciences is important, but I would say that in my case, the answer is very simple. It's because I like it. Most decisions that we make in what we would like to study sometimes are based on what moves us, what we find cute, and what we find interesting. So the honest answer would be I specialize in bees because I like them. And it is important for bees or any other insect to have specialists working on them because insects play a key role in maintaining the ecosystem that we so dearly depend on.
And when you're talking about your work, why it is relevant that we're talking about bees? What is special and why it is really relevant to talk about these creatures?
Okay, so today we are recording this because I did a few episodes that will be coming soon around the topic of wild bees, so covering several aspects of wild bees. And we thought of recording this because the topic of wild bees is unknown. And it would be nice to have an introduction to the topic. And so why am I talking about this? In 2016-17, maybe, I started my PhD journey. And I started working on the wild bee fauna of Lebanon. So I studied their diversity, a little bit their ecology and their floral preferences, so which flowers they like to forage on, what they like to eat, how their communities change with altitude. And I also worked on the effects of heat stress on some species of bees that we have in Lebanon. So I feel confident that I can answer at least the basic questions of what are wild bees and their importance.
So this is what the question that I was wanting to follow up with, and as a person who always been seeing posts about wild bees and bees and probably never been introduced to this concept properly and scientifically, can you explain for me and for the listeners what is a bee, and also why if all bees make honey or not?
Okay, so a bee is an insect. Let's try to go to the basics. And I realize that this is always pretty hard to explain without pictures or, without anything in my hands that I can show to people. So, okay, I'll take this challenge and then I'll try putting pictures in the background for this recording as well. A bee is an insect that has 4 wings and that is a vegetarian. So bees are what we call florivores. They feed exclusively on flower products, so nectar and pollen. Now, I have to say that there are a few exceptions, but they are in tropical areas, of bees who have reverted to a diet where they eat meat. And why do I say reverted? I haven't lost you completely yet. Bees are actually cousins with wasps. So they come from a large group of insects that usually are predators and eat meat or smaller insects. And bees at some point were like, oh, hey, we have a nice opportunity there. Look at all of these complex flowers starting to evolve on Earth. Why don't we feed from them? And so they find this opportunity of becoming vegetarians because they realize, well, pollen has protein and nectar has sugar, and we can find everything we need in that niche. And so they became vegetarians. And a bee is then an insect with 4 wings and 6 legs. Well, like most insects that have 6 legs. Some butterflies have 4 as adults, but I digress. And it is a vegetarian. Is this understandable?
This is really interesting, and also me as a scientist, as I never been introduced to this concept as scientifically simple, I would also say, but also complex at the same time. So thank you so much for that. It's really interesting also to put a lot of disciplines in this definition between evolution, co-evolution, and also this approach. But like when you talked and described wild bees in general, and I see the reality that what we only see and know and hear in the modern recent work is only talk about honeybee.
Yeah.
I would like to know, why do we only talk about honeybees when we describe wild bees?
Okay, so the answer here is relatively simple. We have been rearing honeybees for thousands of years because they produce honey. And because you have this economic argument, which is you have an insect that produces something that is marketable and that is edible and that is delicious, we always hear about honeybees, or predominantly we hear about honeybees. So let's start by, do all bees make honey? The answer is no. We have 20,000 species of wild bees around the world, and only 8 of those make honey. And only one of those, Apis mellifera, so one species on the 20,000, is the honeybee that we all know and raise in hives. Why does Apis mellifera and a few other honeybees make honey? And why do the other bees don't make honey? So, well, do you have an idea?
I absolutely don't, and it's actually it is a big question, because why this is the most common species that we found when it comes to entomology and talking about project conservation of insects and protecting insects. Why it's always honeybees? Is it an economical revenue question related, or why exactly it is?
Yeah, so the short answer is yes, because it produces something that we can sell. And not all bees make honey, because the honeybee is a social insect that has really a lot of individuals per hive. So to feed all this little army of workers that you have, you need to stock food. So you think about it like this, which is they have to go through winter, they have to go through summer, raising hundreds, thousands of larvae at a time, and so they need a lot of food. Because they live in large colonies, they need to produce and stock a lot of food. And thus we have this honey production that we can go pick and then sell. So other bees do make food for their larvae, of course, but it is tiny quantities that we cannot exploit commercially.
Speaking, you talked about colonies, social life. You talk about larvae sustaining offspring. Do other wild bees also have this social life in the sense of having a queen and this maintaining this hierarchy? And also for people who are not aware about having this social structure inside honeybees' life, can you first, as first question, can you describe for us what it's like to have a queen and social worker for honeybees, and for other wild bees if they have also this colony kind of life, not colonial, sorry for that.
Okay, so actually, most wild bees are solitary. So let's start by the social system of honeybees. Very briefly, you have a system that is centered around a queen who is the only individual in the beehive. She is the only female, sorry, that is fertile. Editing self here again to spare you the 10 sentences that were going nowhere. The queen will lay eggs of workers and also of new queens and males. The social system of honeybees is very well known and also very complex, and I think it's better to get someone up on the podcast to talk about this in detail because there's just no way that we're going to be able to fit it in this episode. Thank you for your patience. So, social systems are systems where you have the entire colony working to help the single matriarch or the single queen that will be the individual laying eggs and kind of like, co-organizing all of this life in the hive with feedback from her workers and with all the environmental factors that can create, challenges for them and that can sometimes force them to do some adaptations. And when we have solitary bees that I mentioned a bit earlier, so solitary bees are systems where you have simply a male and a female. And what will happen is you have the males and the females that emerge in spring or in summer, depending if the species is a spring or summer species. They will mate, and then the female will spend her entire life building a nest and stocking enough food, and then she will create what we call little pollen breads. Editing self here to tell you that the term that I was looking for is bee bread. But there are sort of little balls of pollen and nectar. And then she will lay an egg on each of those little pollen breads or on each of those little pollen balls. And she will die. So the male will die, the female will die, they will not meet the second generation. This larvae will grow alone for about 10 months underground or in whatever nest the female has built. And then the cycle will start again next spring or next summer when the adults emerge and, it starts all over again.
That's very interesting also if you're able to visualize this for us. It's really interesting how you put the words in it, but that also made me question when you were talking about the social life and the difference between honeybee and wild bees. There is also a question pop up in my mind: if do all bees sting like honeybees, or it's just only a mechanism for honeybees to protect themselves? Okay, so as a general rule, be it in bees or wasps, all the females sting and all the males do not sting. And yes, what you mentioned is true. The females sting because they have the role of the worker, of the protector of the larvae, and of the protector of the offspring, and they need that extra defense that they will use against predators. So all female bees sting. And again, there are exceptions, but they are in the tropics of stingless bees who, as an alternative, have developed very strong mandibles and now they bite. Oh. Go back to when do they sting? They sting only when they feel that there is a danger. So only if you take one in your hand or really go very close to the nest. But bees are, like wild bees, are not aggressive at all and will only sting if afraid or provoked. For the question of when are they active, so when can you actually see bees? So in countries like Lebanon, you can actually have bees all year round on the coast.
because as long as there is food, you will have some bees that are able to forage in parts of winter and fall. But the high season is really spring and summer.
When you talked about having bees on the coast side, I wanted to know, where do you find them? Like when you're talking about coastal areas, is it related to urban areas, or places are more or less still a little bit of vegetation? That's the coastal line, but also in the mountains. How is the context of these wild bees existing? Is it related to agriculture lands, orchards, or still the forest or the biodiversity spots? Just for people who have the curiosity to know these insects, and also who are scared to be stinged, where to avoid.
Okay, so I would say that you probably have wild bees within 10 meters of your house. It is very easy to find them, and they are everywhere. As long as you have a little bit, like a little patch of vegetation, some flowers, any spontaneous vegetation, there will be bees. Contrary to honeybees, who can go up to 3 kilometers away from the hive, wild bees can usually only do maybe 150 or 300 meters around the place that they nest. So you have to put yourself in their place and go to this micro scale at which they live. They are tiny, and they need to find an adequate place where they nest and where they also find food. And so some of them, most of them actually nest in the soil. So as long as you have a bit of bare soil and some flowers nearby, they will be able to do like the burrows for their nest. They will do a sort of tunnel. At the end of this tunnel, that can be a few centimeters and up to 5 meters long, they will do tiny little chambers in which they put this pollen and nectar ball that we talked about earlier, and then lay an egg. And so you can find them wherever you have bare soil if you look around nests. Some of them nest in dead wood. So a lot of people complain to me that they see a lot of carpenter bees. So Xylocopa in Arabic, I think it's called الجيز, near their or in their wood that they put aside for the chimney, or also in the ceiling of their house if the ceiling of the house is wooden. And so yeah, this is for wood nesters. And you have some bees who also nest in pre-existing cavities. So these are the ones that you usually see using insect hotels. They can use dead stems, like, dead bamboo stems. Bamboo is not native in Lebanon, but like whatever. They can use any dead stem that is hollow, and they can nest inside that. Where do you find them? Actually, if you look close enough, almost everywhere. They are not restricted to natural areas, to answer to your question. Urban areas can offer good havens for wild bees, especially if we let nature grow a little bit, have a few patches of flowers here and there, native flowers preferably. And I'm just gonna maybe go ahead and speak a bit about what they eat. Do you think I answered your question so far?
Yeah, which also you made me want to question another question. What do they feed? You for sure you said native flowers, which something is really important for people to know. Native flowers. These are flowers related to our ecosystem, not invasive ones, to not also change the dietary of the insect. But I will let you talk about this topic because it's more related to pollination and pollination ecology. And I think also people would love to know what flowers do they feed on, if there's any speciality or there's some difference between winter and summer and spring. If you can just give us a general idea about this topic. Sorry.
Okay, so one thing I didn't mention earlier, but which is important for context, is that a wild bee doesn't live very long. The adult will live 2 to 3 weeks, usually, sometimes a bit longer for females, but that's it. And so when they emerge, they will need to find food relatively quickly. And so some of them are extremely picky eaters. They are that brother or sister that you have that only eats 2 platters ever and that will not eat anything else. And so you have a lot of bees that are very picky eaters and that only like, for example, flowers from the pea family, Fabaceae. Some of them cannot forage flowers from the pea family or flowers from the lavender family because these flowers are a bit long and inaccessible. And so these will usually be preferred by bees who have long tongues bees that have short tongues will prefer open flowers. Well, everything that looks like a daisy, marguerite. So everything that has easily accessible pollen. And a lot of short-tongued bees will go crazy for Brassicaceae. The family that has colza and mustard. And they will also sometimes, if they are very tiny, the bee is able to go, like the entire bee is able to go into a larger flower and go have access to the pollen and the nectar. And so what do they feed on is a very wide question. You have a lot of food preferences from the very picky eaters to the bees that actually can adapt and eat anything. Anything, but any flower. And of course, we go back to the question of native flowers, because when you have like decorative flowers, and this is something that you will be able to talk about as well, but a lot of decorative flowers that we plant in gardens are bred for their beauty and for their colors, and they end up having a very low quality of pollen and nectar. Some of them don't even produce nectar anymore. And so the wild bees will not find a lot of food in them. And when they have a lot of petals, you can try and do this for fun. Like go see commercial roses. It makes some bees livid, like they are angry because they're trying to get to that pollen and they have to go through 50 petals to be able to get to that pollen. And so it's also very annoying for bees to forage on flowers that have a lot of petals, because all they want is accessible food. And frankly, like only native flowers will be able to provide that efficiently.
When you're talking about native flowers and also talking about the idea of picky eaters, I stumbled upon an concept in invasion ecology that is related to specialist pollinators and generalist pollinators. For people who doesn't know specialist pollinators and generalist one, would you still be able to define for us what does that mean and how this is related to pollination in the sense of not only pollination ecology, like the whole concept of pollination?
Yeah, so I think the question behind your question is how important it is to have the bee and the flower at the same place so that the flower can actually have a successful reproduction. Usually, bees that are picky eaters or that prefer a restricted range of flowers, there is the same effort that is made by the flower. So the flower has evolved in a way to be more inviting to the certain type of bee, and this is the co-evolution. And what this will do is basically make it easier for the flower to for the bee to like going over the same flower again and again, and for the flower to ensure that it will have its pollen scattered across individuals of the same species and have good genetic diversity in the seeds of the next generation. And generalists are also important, generalist bees, because they pollinate a bit of everything. And so they are also sometimes more adaptable, because if you have landscape or habitat destruction and the plant or some of the plants that they feed on do not exist anymore, they will still be able to get by feeding on other things. Whereas for the picky eaters, if their plant is not there, they simply die from hunger. And a lot of bees have went extinct because their plants were not available in the landscapes anymore.
Well, was a kind of follow-up question, because we wanted to know which bees are declining and what are the reason behind this declining. You're talking about habitat loss and about this source of food have disappearing. What are the other things that is related to their decline? Can you please tell us also if human are also related, their activity is also related to such decline?
Where do we start? Yes, so climate change. Climate change is one of the reasons of decline. So it is not only like the progressive warming that is a problem, it is the extreme temperatures that are a problem. So when you have a heat wave, this is sometimes enough to push an entire species to extinction, because you have a season where they're all active and just, living happily outside, and then you have a heat wave and it kills most of the adults out there. If this happens 2 to 3 years, in a row, and this has already happened to some bumblebees in Arctic areas, it is enough to wipe out an entire species off the face of the earth. And so this is the first reason, climate change. Another reason is habitat fragmentation that you mentioned, and this is really important for a lot of things. It is one of the main drivers of extinction for a lot of wild bees, because as we said, they really need at this little micro level, at this little micro scale, to have a bit of bare soil or other substrates where they can live and, prepare a nest. They need to have some native flowers to be able to feed on. And what has happened in the recent years in many areas, be it with urbanization or with like intensive agriculture, all of these little pockets where a lot of species could survive are now disappearing because we cannot afford to keep them wild, because we have to build something there or because we have to plant something there. And so this is another reason. There is, of course, pesticides, which comes and adds insult to injury. So pesticides is one of the reasons, but like contrary to what we might think, it is not as catastrophic as habitat destruction. Not to say that, it's not bad, but habitat destruction is the most catastrophic, and pesticides are there to add an extra layer of difficulty. And maybe I'll stop there. But these are the main reasons of the decline. And of course, one reason which we will discuss more in a future episode with Ru'a, that I hope you will enjoy. She also spoke about disease spillover. So when we have honeybees, for example, and honeybees carry a disease or, a virus or other diseases, this disease can be transmitted through flowers to other wild bees. And this can also contribute to their decline because we are introducing a bunch of diseases that they are not used to into this wild population, and this can also contribute to them declining.
You talked a lot about bees and the things that their social life, their feeding behavior, their habitat loss, the problem that's related to declining, and that's wanted to ask why are bees more popular than other insects? When we're talking about other insects in this sense of pollination, I think you know more than I do that ants also do pollination, flies also do pollination, crickets, cockroaches, the one that we hate and we all go crazy on. Why are bees more popular than the other one? What's the hype behind it?
Okay, so I would say thank you for using the word popular and not important. They are not more important than other insects. Flies, as you mentioned, and other beetles are equally important pollinators, and also night butterflies, so moth, night moth. And the simple answer is we feel more like protecting something that we find cute or attractive. And because bees are more popular, because they look nicer, bumblebees, they look like little plushies, they have big eyes, they buzz, they fly slowly, they're very cute, they're lovable. And so we feel like protecting things that we connect easier with. And this is unfortunate because it means a lot of very important insects are going extinct without us giving a second thought to them. And so this brings me to a very important point. To protect something, you need to know it, and to get to know it, you sometimes need to go over or put aside the biases that you might have on whether you find something beautiful or not.
I like the last sentence, go over, the last two words. Since we're talking about go over, can you go over with us to Lebanon in the sense of how many wild bees do we have, if there is a checklist about the status of these bees? And for this is just an open mic for you to tell us all about Lebanon. Take it from someone that have zero knowledge about this topic, and I have a lot of question about, do we have a checklist? What is their status in Lebanon? Is there any study about this topic? Where you can find this checklist? Is it available? This microphone is for you, and please tell us.
Okay, so Lebanon, God, there's so much to say. So basically, when I started getting interested in pollinators and wild bees, I was like, I really want to study wild bees. This is so cool. What do we know about the topic in Lebanon? And the short answer is almost nothing. So when I started the PhD almost 10 years ago now, yes, it has been a while, I realized that very little was known on the topic. Although a lot of countries in Central and Northern Europe and the US and Australia already had a good knowledge on their bee fauna and were moving forward with red lists and conservation plans, we didn't even know what species we had in Lebanon. So why is this like important? Because I was dreaming of starting a red list, writing a conservation plan, doing all of these sophisticated studies on how wild bees contribute to pollinating our crops and our apple trees. But like I cannot answer any of those questions if I don't know what wild bees we actually have. And so the first step was making a checklist. And it was published in 2021. I am now working on the update because it is already obsolete. But we have more than 800 species of wild bees in Lebanon. And to give you an image of how diverse Lebanon is, France, which is 50 times bigger than Lebanon, almost, has 1,000 bee species. We almost have as much bees as France for 50 times less the surface. Europe, so the entirety of Europe, has 2,300 species. So I cannot express well enough how diverse Lebanon is and just like how incredible it is for wild bees. Okay, so this is to answer your question on whether there is a checklist.
Yeah, this is also the answer about whether there is a checklist, and you also told us you have a publication. Is it available somewhere? Can you put the link for people know about it, and also for people who will be having this hard time discovering this scientific terminology and the Latin names, because in science is Latin names. Is there any place they can check pictures of these insects to know this insect?
Yeah, so first the checklist is freely available online. I can link it to the post. And also, if you are looking for something more a communication or basic information on what is a wild bee, I can also link some resources that I had worked on during the PhD, which have pictures of bees that we have in Lebanon and some of their biology when they forage, etc. So some science communication content that I can also link to the post. And a checklist is basically a list of species. And it is an important start because it allows us to look at all the literature we have available, see what all the fieldwork that we did in the recent years was able to bring to the table, so what extra knowledge it was able to bring to the table. And we also go around asking museums in different countries if they have any specimens deposited from Lebanon, and we also try to include those in the database. So a lot of the work was done on the field, but a lot of the work was also done behind the PC and museum hopping. Okay, so maybe I can talk a bit about what do we know about the wild bees in Lebanon and their conservation status. I told you that I was dreaming about doing a red list. And we know a little bit now. So after the checklist, I was able to work on the heat stress resistance of some bee species that we have. And as expected, we found out that the bumblebees that we have only in the alpine, so above 1,800 meters in Lebanon, are probably not that resistant to heat waves. They did not perform well at all in the heat resistance stress tests. And we were able to conclude that they will be extremely vulnerable, were we to have any extreme climate events, so like a heat wave, in the near future or in the coming years. And others are doing very well. So the bees that are already resistant to heat, you always have a minority. So I will emphasize that it is a minority of bees that are doing well because they like drier climate. They are using the opportunity of climate change to colonize new altitudes and new habitats. And yeah. Now, being able to answer more advanced questions, like, for example, being able to tell you which bees have a risk of extinction in Lebanon, we will be able to answer that for a bunch of species, but not all the 700. So a lot of research is still necessary to be able to give those answers.
That's a very interesting answer, but also that's pop up a question in my mind, like most of the people listening here. So when you're talking about these big scientific terminology, when it comes to heat waves, climatology, climate change, bumblebee resistance, how can a citizens who are listening to this podcast can able to help you and also able to document, or how they can have access to such information so they can able to help you? Because I know from my field we rely a lot on field work, but also we have this limitation because we cannot cover up a lot of areas and a lot of places because we need to exist in spot number 1, 2, 3, 4, but because of the time. So given your opinion, your expertise, how the people are listening to this after them being knowing about the idea of bees, wild bees, pollination, their status in Lebanon, what are the threats that are related to them to Lebanon, your own research, how these people can help and be part of such ongoing projects?
Okay, so this touches a question which is wild bees in citizen science, and how feasible is it to include wild bees in citizen science projects. So unfortunately, wild bees, like many other Hymenoptera, so the order that includes bees and wasps and ants, are very difficult to determine. So it is very difficult to just look at an insect or like a wild bee and recognize the species. This usually requires taking the specimen and looking at it under like a stereoscope, and at this usually 40 times magnification, you're able to see a few usually very discrete criteria which will give you hints or which will tell you which species that is. So we do have a few species in Lebanon that can be determined by pictures. So I can imagine that bumblebees can be a good candidate for citizen science projects, because we only have 4 species of bumblebees, and thank God they have different colorations. Because in bumblebees you usually have a very common case of like one coloration including 5 or 6 different species. And also having a lot of what we call cryptic species, which is there is no way to tell the difference apart taking a genetic sample, so taking a sample to genetic testing. So yeah, this is to answer the question. The general public can participate in helping us monitor bees, but we would need to have the framework and the structure behind it. For the moment, it has not been possible to start something like that in Lebanon. I hope it will be possible in the near future. And I have hope. We will see. But there is something very important that people listening can do, which is get to know them, get to know the bees, get to know insects. When you go out, be it in your garden or to any random patch of flowers that you see next to your house or in the city or in a parking lot. Parking lots are amazing for bees, by the way, because you have this bare soil and then you have some flowers that people usually forget to cut, and opportunity. Be it on your hikes, like anywhere in nature, start looking, start noticing the different colors, the different patterns. Look at the behavior. If you notice something collecting pollen and putting it on one leg and then the other, then you're probably looking at a wild bee. If you see something digging a burrow in the soil with legs stocked with pollen and just like burrowing in the soil and coming back up, that's probably a wild bee. And so this is something very important that each individual can do, because you are getting to know these insects a bit more, and you are preparing yourself to be able to take more steps towards their conservation. And one last thing that you can do to protect them is, if you have a garden, I know it's very difficult to do it, but the easiest thing to do for wild bees and the most important thing to do is nothing. Do nothing in part of your garden. Let the weeds grow. Let the wildflowers grow. Let the soil, without, plowing it, just leave it be. And the wild bees and many native insects will thank you for it, I promise. Okay, this was a 5-minute answer. How much did we say this episode would take? 30 minutes?
We're like 25 minutes.
We're 45 minutes
really
in.
That's really good. It's really good also because when you're talking about let it be and let it live, this idea, I also wanted to add this my work. Please focus on planting native plants to save native insects, because if we go back to the idea of we want to make this beautification of the garden and growing exotic plants, and we're having this exotic pollen and flower, those native insects that we were talking about and those native bees, they will just simply extinct. So this point, all of it just disappear. So just wanted to add on that, when we wanted to do all this agriculture or gardening related activities, please think about those little creatures, think about those plants, grow more native plants, and avoid as much as you can exotic plants. This is from my side. I want to thank Dr. Mira this time for her information, for her time with us, and I would give her the last time the microphone if she want to say anything.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Mohammad, for coming on to this podcast, and for creating this space and the opportunity for me to be able to go on forever about wild bees. But I would agree with you, and I would really reinforce this idea again and again. You don't need to go very far to do conservation work. You don't need to go to the end of the world or to a very beautiful natural area to do something that is beneficial for the local fauna and flora. It really starts from your doorstep. And don't hesitate to hit us up if you have any questions on wild bees, on invasive plants, whatever else comes to mind. We can ask someone if we don't know.